Good day, Coach. My name is Jona Lacastesantos, and I'm from BSED Mathematics 1K, and I'm one of the leader of 1K Ped 5 peer teacher discussion from the Team 3. And now, together with my teammates, we are going to give our insights about the learner-centered psychological principles. But before we will give our insights, let me first define the learner-centered psychological principles. So in the beginning of 1990, the American Psychological Association, or the APA, appointed a special task force on psychological and education. One of those purposes was to integrate the research and theory from the psychological and education in order to surface general principles that we have stood the test of time and can provide a framework for school redesign and reform, where the learner-centered psychological principles are representation of the current knowledge based on learners and learning. It is also related to the beliefs, characteristics, dispositions, practices of teachers, and also primarily created by the teacher. So in this learner-centered psychological association, or the APA, there are 14 learner-centered principles that are categorized into 4 domains, such as metacognitive and cognitive factors, affective and motivational factors, developmental and social factors, and individual difference factors. An understanding of these domains and the principles within them, it establishes a framework for designing the learner-centered practices at all levels of schooling. It also helps define what the learner-centered means from a research-validated perspective. My insights about these learner-centered psychological principles is that every learner-centered teaching is an approach that places the learner at the center of the learning. This means that the learner or the student is responsible for the learning, while the tutor is responsible for facilitating the learning. A learner-centered approach is important to adult teaching environment for many reasons. One is that to help to develop the learners who can learn and work on their own, and it enables them to lifelong learning to be independent and to solve their own problems. So many of every learners who have low adult literacy and numeracy skills in struggling in teacher-centered environment. All that I can say is that anything that you can do to make learning more active for them is a good thing.
Good day, Coach Jude S. Martinez. I'm Rosie Bendanillo, Team 3 Peer Discussion of BSED Mathematics. Based on my understanding on learner-centered psychological through teaching is focused on individual learners, their heredity experience, perspective, backgrounds, talents, interests, capacities, and needs. The best available knowledge about learning and how it is occurs, and about teaching practices that are most effective in promoting the highest levels of motivation, learning, and achievement for all learners. Learner-centered is a reflection in practices of the learning-centered psychological principles in the programs, practices, policies, and people that support learning for all. There are 14 learner-centered principles are categorized into 4 domains. One is the cognitive and metacognitive factors. And there are 6 principles: nature of learning process, goals of learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, context learning. 2 is the motivational and affective factors. And there are 3 principles. One is the motivational and emotional influences of learning. 2 is the intrinsic motivation of learning. 3 effects of motivation on effort. 3 developmental influences of learning. And there are 2 principles: developmental influences of learning, social influence of learning. 3 is the individual differences of factors. And there are 3 principles: individual differences in learning. 2 is learning and diversity. 3 is standard and assessment. And that's all.
Hello, Coach Jude Martinez. I am Louie Jay Torejos. My insight about the lesson, Learner-Centered Psychological Principles, is that it is essential in the needs of the learners because it would help the students to grow and develop their abilities, also their skills, and also their critical thinking on how they will interpret and create new information about the subject matter. So as a future educator, it is also significant to know this kind of principles because it helps us to create a teaching strategies in our teaching profession on how can we teach the students in order for them to easily understand about the lesson. Thank you.
Today, I am Fatima Grace A. Pedregosa, a BSed mathematics student. So my insights regarding to this topic, which is learner-centered psychological principles, is that this topic discusses about how teachers facilitate and how they offer effective learning experiences to their students. This learner-centered is focused on individual learners and their learning needs. They must adequately prepare their students to be productive, skillful, and have a healthy future. And we have these 14 principles involved in the learner-centered psychological principles. And these 14 principles are grouped into 4 general factors, namely cognitive and metacognitive factors, motivational and affective factors, developmental and social factors, and lastly, individual differences factors. This establishes a framework for designing learner-centered practices, and it also helps define what is learner-centered. This focus on each learner's perception, needs, and motivations. It is because the focus here is the learners, so they ensure that the learners are effectively learning by teachers' strategy. And that's all. Thank you.
Good day, Coach. My name is Ezekiel Agustin, BSE Ed Math 1K. So my insights about this topic is that it provides a framework for developing and incorporating the components of new designs for schooling. These principles emphasize the active and reflective nature of learning and learners. It is essential to the learners because it will help them to be more productive, and it will also help them to grow their talents, skills as a student. Individual differences are the more or less enduring psychological characteristics that distinguish one person from another, and thus help to define each person's individuality. Among the rest important kinds of individual differences are intelligence, personality traits, and values.
And that's all for our discussion and for our insights about these learner-centered psychological principles. Thank you for watching and for listening. And again, we are the 1K Ped 5 Peer Teacher Discussion from the Team 3.